Hello from Daily Moral Story. Welcome to today's inspiring tale. Jacob Pierce had always believed in the power of a warm handshake and a genuine smile. He built his restaurant chain from scratch, guided by the principle that kindness should come before profit. In his earliest days, he would personally greet every guest who stepped through the door, learn their names and stories, and make sure they felt at home. That was his secret to success, a simple but sincere human connection. Yet as the years went by and his diners expanded to new towns, Jacob found himself swamped with spreadsheets, brand strategies, and investor meetings. Growth brought prestige, but it also distanced him from the people who were the soul of his business. Deep down, he worried that the human warmth he had once cherished was vanishing. He started hearing whispers about one of his oldest locations, a place called Cresthill Diner, where rumors suggested that staff felt ignored and beaten down. Customers mentioned a sour atmosphere, slower service, and fewer smiles. Jacob's regional managers insisted that everything was fine, pointing to stable profits and manageable costs. But the conflicting bits of gossip, negative online comments, and occasional employee complaints kept nagging at him. He could have dismissed them as minor issues, but something told him the reports were symptoms of a deeper problem he had not yet confronted. His conscience wouldn't let him rest until he saw the truth for himself. One brisk morning, he drove 2 hours to Cresthill, leaving his luxury car at home to avoid drawing attention. Dressed in faded jeans, an unassuming jacket, and a worn baseball cap, he stepped onto the sidewalk a block away from the diner. A cold breeze ruffled his hair. He paused, briefly remembering how in the early days he would drop in on his diners unannounced, chatting with customers and staff before rushing off to his next big plan. Now he felt oddly anxious, as if preparing for an exam. He inhaled deeply, steeled his nerves, and walked toward the small building whose sign read Cresthill Diner in neon letters that had begun to flicker. When he entered, a blast of warm air hit him, carrying the aromas of bacon, freshly brewed coffee, and something faintly metallic from the open kitchen. The interior looked much as he remembered, though more worn. The once vibrant booths were a little tattered, and the paint had lost its luster. A young waitress with a tight ponytail rushed by, weaving between tables, holding a carafe of coffee in one hand and an order pad in the other. Her name tag read Megan. She cast a hurried smile in Jacob's direction before darting to a booth occupied by a mother trying to console a fussy toddler. He found a seat at a table near the window and waited. A few minutes later, Megan approached, offering him a small grin that flickered between friendliness and fatigue. "Good morning," she said, gently placing a laminated menu in front of him. "Sorry for the wait. What can I get you to drink?" He asked for black coffee and a glass of water. She scrawled his order onto her pad, apologized once more for being so busy, and then hurried off to the next table. Jacob looked around as he waited. The morning crowd was steady but not overwhelming. Families grabbing breakfast, a few older couples lingering over coffee, and a scattering of individuals reading newspapers or checking phones. Yet an undercurrent of tension seemed to permeate the diner. Instead of the easy chatter and upbeat buzz he remembered, there was an air of rushed unease. He overheard mild complaints about slow service and a couple of pointed remarks about people having seen better days here. He picked up snatches of conversation about burnt toast, lukewarm eggs, and inattentive management. Megan returned promptly with his drinks, setting them down carefully. He could see the shadow under her eyes. "Need a minute with the menu?" she asked, glancing at the clock behind the counter. He noticed her stiff posture, as though bracing herself for the next demand. Gently, he said, "I'll have the special omelet with bacon, and thanks." She smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Coming right up," she replied, scribbling swiftly on her pad before moving on. Jacob watched her go. He made a mental note that she seemed overworked and possibly short-handed. After a few more sips of coffee, he spotted a man emerging from the kitchen wearing a stained apron and a fierce scowl. This had to be Rick, the shift manager he had heard about. The man barked orders to the kitchen staff, complaining that they were too slow. When Megan slipped behind the counter, Rick glared at her. "You're falling behind on your refills again," he snapped. She murmured an apology and rushed to grab a coffee pot. Jacob could almost see her shoulders tense. As Jacob waited for his food, he continued eavesdropping. A retired couple next to him grumbled about the shift in atmosphere. They remembered how the place once felt like home, but now the staff seemed anxious and the sense of warmth had faded. Jacob felt a pang of guilt. This was supposed to be the flagship vibe of his entire chain, a space where families felt comfortable and employees felt respected. He swallowed hard, wishing he had come here months earlier. A young server with curly brown hair, Connor according to his name tag, carried plates of scrambled eggs, pancakes, and sides of sausage. He navigated the narrow aisles with care, apologizing for delays. From time to time, Jacob caught him glancing at Rick with uneasy eyes, as if anticipating criticism. Rick, for his part, loomed in the background, arms crossed, occasionally barking a terse instruction to either Megan or Connor. A moment later, Megan delivered Jacob's omelet with a forced smile, quickly retreating to address another customer who called for extra napkins. The tension was unmistakable. Jacob felt it, the customers sensed it, and the staff, especially Megan, wore it like a burden. He ate slowly, listening to the atmosphere shift with each passing minute. When a woman at the counter complained about undercooked bacon, Rick stomped over, telling Megan in a gruff tone to watch the orders more carefully. Megan's cheeks flushed. She forced out an apology while Rick hovered over her, practically in the customer's face. The woman glanced away, evidently uncomfortable with the confrontation. Jacob finished his meal and left a generous tip. Then he lingered at his table, pretending to scroll through his phone while covertly observing the dynamic. He noticed that Rick rarely did any direct customer service, preferring instead to stay near the kitchen. Megan and Connor bore the brunt of dealing with complaints, and though they were clearly trying, they looked exhausted. In quieter moments, Megan occasionally paused to rub her temples, as if warding off a headache. Jacob realized that the stress of a difficult manager was permeating every aspect of their work. He decided he had seen enough for one morning. Leaving, he offered Megan a kind "thank you," to which she mustered a polite nod. Outside, he exhaled in the brisk air. His mind was already plotting how to investigate further. The next day, from his home office, Jacob combed through staff records, performance reviews, and operational budgets for Cresthill. He found high turnover, especially among servers, and multiple notes from employees who resigned citing hostile work environment. No direct complaints about Rick had ever reached Jacob's desk, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. He called the regional manager responsible for Cresthill, who claimed staff issues were minor growing pains. Jacob pressed him for more detail, but the man remained evasive, pointing to stable profits and ignoring any mention of morale. That was enough for Jacob. He decided to return, not just for a cursory visit, but to embed himself for a few days until he got to the root of the problem. He put a hold on his other obligations, cleared his schedule, and told nobody but his personal assistant about his plan. On a chilly afternoon, Jacob arrived at Cresthill again, wearing the same inconspicuous clothes. He spotted Megan at a corner table, prepping silverware. She seemed surprised to see him. "Back so soon?" she asked, half smiling. He shrugged. "I liked the coffee," he joked, "and I guess I just like the atmosphere here." Her smile faltered a bit, as though she could guess he was making small talk, but she simply nodded and pointed him to an open booth. This time, Jacob skipped breakfast and ordered only coffee. He wanted to keep a clear head so he could watch, listen, and gather more information. Rick made his presence known soon enough. The dinner crowd was smaller than the breakfast rush, so tensions should have been lower, yet Rick still found reasons to bark orders and complain. He insisted Connor restock sauce bottles, then snapped at Megan to fetch extra chairs for a group of 4 who needed space. Every request crackled with impatience and condescension, as if he took pleasure in making them jump. When Megan disappeared into the back to get more napkins, Jacob overheard a snippet of conversation from the couple in the booth behind him. They seemed uneasy about how Rick had spoken to the staff. One whispered, "I feel bad for that waitress." Jacob's heart sank. He had launched this business on the idea that employees would feel valued, but here it felt like a dictatorship. As the evening progressed, Jacob asked Megan a few gentle questions whenever she swung by. He learned she'd been at Cresthill for 8 months, loved interacting with customers, and was a fan of the old menu that had once been a hallmark. She admitted that the biggest problem was staffing. They were always short-handed, often forced to work double shifts. She didn't explicitly mention Rick's behavior, but her eyes flicked toward him whenever she talked about the challenge. Jacob sensed her fear. He thought about revealing who he was right then, telling her not to worry because real help had arrived, but he decided against it. He wanted to collect undeniable, first-hand evidence of Rick's toxic approach and understand exactly how he would behave if he believed Jacob was just a random patron. Without that, Rick might come up with excuses, or worse, Megan might be singled out if Rick suspected she'd complained to the owner. So Jacob stayed incognito, though the guilt gnawed at him. Later that night, Connor dropped off Jacob's check with a tired but sincere smile. "Thanks for stopping by. Hope your coffee was good." Jacob nodded. "It was great, thanks to you guys. Seems like you're working hard?" Connor let out a short laugh. Hard is one word for it. He glanced over his shoulder, perhaps checking if Rick was around, then leaned forward and whispered, "To be honest, it's pretty tense here." He trailed off as if unsure how much to reveal. Jacob gave him an encouraging nod. "Well, keep at it. Your effort shows." Connor straightened, gave a short, grateful nod, and hurried off to help a table that had just arrived. Once Jacob left, he called his assistant, Janet, instructing her to gather every detail about Cresthill's finances, labor budget, and employee files. He requested performance reviews and specifically wanted to know if Rick had ever been formally reprimanded. Janet promised to have all that ready by the next morning. Then she asked if Jacob needed her to clear any upcoming meetings. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I'm dedicating the next few days entirely to Cresthill." He hung up and felt a surge of resolve. This was his business, his responsibility. He refused to let it spiral into a place where people cried at work and customers felt uneasy. The following morning, Jacob arrived right after the diner opened. He saw Megan wiping tables, hair in a loose ponytail, eyes a bit puffy as if she hadn't slept well. Connor was in the kitchen, presumably prepping for breakfast orders. Rick hadn't shown up yet, which let the staff breathe a little. Jacob sat at a booth and waved when Megan spotted him, nodding hello. She approached with an attempt at a warm greeting. But before she could take his order, Rick stormed in, complaining that some supplies hadn't been put away properly. He didn't acknowledge Jacob, which suited Jacob fine. He watched Rick scold a cook for failing to prep enough bacon, then heard him gripe about schedules with another server who looked frazzled. The diner was hardly crowded, yet Rick spoke to his employees as if the place were on fire. Jacob felt his anger rise but forced himself to stay calm. After about an hour, the tension escalated when a disappointed customer at the counter complained about burnt toast. Megan apologized, offering to replace it. The woman merely shrugged, but Rick marched over, demanding, "How'd this happen?" He shot Megan a glare. "You told the cook wrong, didn't you?" Megan flushed. I just wrote the order." "I didn't—" Rick cut her off. "Then it's the cook's fault. Why are we messing up simple orders?" Jacob could see Megan's eyes shimmer with tears, though she tried to maintain composure. Rick kept rattling on about incompetent staff, oblivious to how he was causing a scene. The few customers present exchanged awkward glances. Jacob was on the verge of standing up, but he held back a moment longer. He wanted to see if Rick would cross the line. Right on cue, Rick hissed something under his breath that Jacob couldn't quite catch. Whatever it was, it made Megan's lip quiver. She mumbled an apology to the woman at the counter and fled to the kitchen. Jacob noticed Connor look helplessly from a distance, weighed down by an order of pancakes he had to deliver. Rick followed Megan, presumably to continue his rant. That was it. Jacob had seen enough. Leaving a small amount of cash for his coffee, he quietly slipped from his booth and walked toward the kitchen door. Before stepping inside, he heard the muffled sounds of Megan's soft sobs and Rick's raised voice telling her, "If you can't handle the heat, go somewhere else." Jacob took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He pushed open the door. The cramped kitchen smelled of grease and freshly cracked eggs. Megan stood by a large trash can, tears on her cheeks, while Rick hovered over her, arms folded. Connor stood by the grill holding a spatula, torn between speaking up and staying silent. Two other cooks busied themselves, clearly uncomfortable, glancing back nervously. Rick noticed Jacob and snapped, "This area's for employees only, get out." Jacob kept his voice calm. "Not until I know she's all right." Megan wiped her eyes hastily. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her quivering voice betrayed her. Rick turned to Megan, practically ignoring Jacob. "Get back to work," he barked. "She needs a minute," he insisted. "Wouldn't hurt to show some compassion." Rick sneered. "Who do you think you are?" Jacob pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal his company ID. In a clear voice he said, "I'm Jacob Pierce. I own this diner and every other location in the chain." The room fell silent as Connor's spatula clattered to the floor in shock. Megan stared in disbelief, wiping more tears away. Rick's eyes flickered with panic before he tried to recover. I didn't realize," he stammered. Jacob leveled his gaze at Rick. "No, you didn't, because if you did, you'd never talk to my employees like this." Rick opened his mouth to retort, but Jacob held up a hand. "We'll discuss this in the office. Now." Rick shot Megan a cold glare and stomped off toward the tiny manager's office. Jacob gently touched Megan's arm. "Take a break, please," he said softly. Megan nodded, still trembling. Connor breathed a sigh of relief when Rick was out of sight. Jacob gave him a tight smile. "We'll sort this out," he promised. Then he followed Rick. In the tiny office, cluttered with receipts and supply orders, Jacob shut the door. He fixed Rick with a steady look. "Explain," he said quietly. Rick puffed up, attempting to sound confident. "Sir, I'm just being strict so we can run this place efficiently. These employees are lazy, and if I don't push them, we'll lose money." Jacob's jaw clenched. "I've read the complaints. I've seen morale tank. Customers have noticed the tension. You think that's saving the diner money?" Rick fidgeted. "Better they be afraid than complacent," he muttered. Jacob let out a slow exhale. "That's not how I built this business. I built it on respect. Your approach is the opposite of everything our brand stands for." Rick's voice rose defensively. "Look, the store's making profit. We're getting by fine." Jacob shook his head. "No, we're not fine. I won't have staff crying in the kitchen. I won't have customers feeling sorry for my employees." He fixed Rick with a firm stare. "You're done here. You're no longer employed with this company." Rick's face went pale. Then he tried to protest, offering excuses about staffing shortages and incompetent workers. But Jacob was resolute. "Pack your things. HR will contact you regarding severance. We're finished." Rick cursed under his breath, snatched up his coat, and shoved past Jacob out the door. Jacob could hear him muttering as he stormed away. Alone in the small office, Jacob ran a hand through his hair. He didn't relish firing people, but he saw no other choice. Rick's toxic leadership threatened the entire establishment. Pushing aside a stack of papers on the desk, Jacob opened the door to the hallway. Connor hovered outside, eyes wide. "He's gone," Jacob said, trying to stay calm. Connor nodded slowly, relief evident on his face. "So, what happens now?" Jacob placed a hand on Connor's shoulder. "We rebuild," he answered. Then he stepped into the kitchen, where Megan stood by the dish station, trying to compose herself. The cooks had gone back to work, but each eyed Jacob as he walked in. "Rick is no longer your manager," Jacob announced quietly, so only the staff could hear. "Starting now, I'll be overseeing this diner until we find a new manager. We're going to do things differently." Megan's shoulders sagged with what appeared to be sheer relief. Connor exhaled audibly. One of the older cooks actually cracked a small smile. Nobody cheered, but the tension in the room noticeably lifted. Jacob put a reassuring hand on Megan's arm. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, though tears still rimmed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. Jacob gave a small nod, then stepped back. "Take 5 minutes, then come out and help me talk to the rest of the team, okay?" Megan took that break. Jacob walked into the dining area and addressed the staff who had gathered. Another server, a hostess who had just arrived for the lunch shift, and a dishwasher who peeked from behind a stack of plates. The regular hum of customers had died down, with only a few tables occupied now. Jacob cleared his throat, his voice low but resonant. "My name is Jacob Pierce. Some of you might know I founded this diner chain years ago. I apologize for not stepping in sooner, but I'm here now, and I promise we'll fix this situation. Rick is gone. I won't tolerate disrespect toward any of you." The employees exchanged hesitant smiles, their body language turning from tense to cautiously optimistic. Jacob continued. We're short-staffed, yes, and we have a lot of challenges, but we'll tackle them together. Let's get through today's service, and after we close, we'll hold a meeting to discuss next steps. You have my word, things are going to change. An almost palpable relief swept the room. Jacob saw a flicker of hope in their faces. He pulled Megan aside when she emerged from the kitchen. Let's talk after your shift, he said gently. She nodded, regaining her composure. Then the diner resumed its hum as customers trickled in for a late lunch. Jacob spent the afternoon quietly observing and occasionally lending a hand, bussing tables, refilling coffee, and scanning the place for issues that needed fixing. With Rick gone, the staff seemed more relaxed, though still tired from months of overwork. At closing, Jacob locked the door with Megan, Connor, and a handful of employees. They gathered in the center of the dining area, turning off most of the lights except for a few overhead lamps. Outside, the street lamps cast a gentle glow on the windows. Jacob looked at the group. These people had been weathering a storm he hadn't realized was so severe. I want to hear from each of you, he said softly. Tell me how we can make Cresthill Diner the place it was meant to be. The dishwasher, a shy young man, spoke about working long hours without a decent break. One of the cooks, an older woman, mentioned outdated kitchen equipment that slowed them down. The hostess talked about scheduling nightmares, where she'd be called in at the last minute. Megan described the lack of staff during peak times, which left her running from table to table with no support. Connor admitted that, if not for his loyalty to Megan, he might have quit weeks ago. Jacob took notes, promising immediate improvements where possible. He affirmed that new hires would be brought in, better schedules arranged, and a suitable manager found. I'll be here for at least a few days to make sure we get this right, he added. And I want you all to know my door or booth is always open if you have concerns. Megan exhaled, her eyes misty. Thank you, she said. I was really starting to think nobody cared. Connor chimed in. It's been rough, but I'm glad you stepped in. Jacob felt a stab of regret for his long absence, but also a surge of determination. He concluded the impromptu meeting with a promise to start fresh the next morning. As they turned out the lights, a hint of optimism crept into everyone's expressions. Jacob recognized it as the spark that lit the best workplaces, hope for a better tomorrow. He locked the door behind them, the neon sign blinking overhead. A few employees offered him shy goodnights. Megan thanked him quietly before walking to her car, shoulders more relaxed than he'd seen before. True to his word, Jacob arrived at dawn the next day, coffee in hand. Over the next week, he worked side by side with the staff, discovering more details of the operation. He helped fix a shortage of cleaning supplies, personally called in a repair for a faulty fryer, and spent hours interviewing candidates for new server positions. He also recognized that some employees, like Connor, had leadership potential. Jacob offered Connor a chance to train as assistant manager, praising his calm under pressure and genuine concern for coworkers. Megan, who had been carrying the diner on her back, received a significant pay raise and a more manageable schedule. Jacob observed her blossoming with relief as she no longer had to single-handedly juggle every busy shift. He could see the pride in her eyes when, a few days later, she discovered that regulars were leaving positive comments about the new, friendlier atmosphere. Customers noticed the changes too. The tension had lifted, replaced by better coordinated service and kinder interactions. While a full transformation would take time, the energy in Cresthill Diner had shifted palpably. Connor managed the floor with an eager smile, Megan greeted customers with renewed warmth, and even the cooks joked around when orders slowed. One late afternoon, as the day's crowd thinned, Jacob found himself wiping down tables alongside Megan. She looked up, an honest smile tugging at her lips. It feels different now, she confessed. People don't seem so on edge. Jacob nodded, tucking a rag into his back pocket. It's amazing what removing a toxic influence can do. But it's not just that. You and the others stepped up. You showed resilience. Megan glanced around at the nearly empty diner. Thank you again, she murmured. I never really believed someone higher up would care. Jacob's chest tightened. I should have come sooner, he admitted. She shook her head. You're here now, and that's what matters." He gave her a small smile. "I'm going to keep checking in on this place, making sure we stay on the right track." That evening he gathered the team for a brief end-of-day chat. He shared the good news, a wave of positive customer reviews, a slight but promising increase in daily revenue, and lower staff turnover. "We're not out of the woods yet," he cautioned, "but we're headed in the right direction." The employees, once timid, now met his gaze with confidence. They clapped for each other, even teased Connor about being the new boss. The atmosphere felt like a family again, which was what Jacob had always dreamed of creating. Before leaving for the night, Jacob found a quiet moment to reflect. Standing near the entrance, he looked at the row of framed photographs on the wall, snapshots of the diner's early days, back when he himself had painted the walls a cheerful color. He saw a younger version of himself in one picture, beaming alongside a group of employees, arms slung around their shoulders. It reminded him of his core motivation, to bring people together in a place that felt like home. He turned to you, dear reader, with a gentle question in his eyes. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone's sheer persistence or compassion sparked a complete turnaround? Sometimes it only takes one brave action to break a toxic cycle and make room for genuine human decency. Maybe you've been that person, or maybe you've been waiting for a sign to step up. What would it look like if you decided to become that catalyst for change in your own sphere? Over the next several days, Jacob ensured the diner functioned smoothly. When new employees came in, he trained them personally or had Megan and Connor guide them, emphasizing the culture of respect he wanted to restore. He replaced battered booths, got rid of outdated kitchen equipment, and reinstated small traditions, like staff lunches once a month. Some of these changes cost money in the short term, but Jacob believed wholeheartedly that investing in people would yield far greater returns in morale, service quality, and customer loyalty. Customers responded in kind. They left compliments on the diner's social media pages, praising the friendly staff and improved atmosphere. Regulars returned, bringing friends and spreading the word. Revenue slowly rose, and employees reported feeling proud to wear the Cresthill uniform again. Jacob watched the transformation with a blend of pride and humility. He recognized how close he had come to letting this diner slip into something he never wanted it to be, a place of drudgery instead of warmth. At the end of his stay, Jacob called one final meeting after closing time. Megan, Connor, and the rest of the crew gathered, forming a semicircle around him. The hum of refrigerator fans and the distant clang of pans in the kitchen underscored the hush of anticipation. Jacob addressed them with an earnest tone. "I'm heading back to my main office, but that doesn't mean I'm abandoning you. I'll be checking in often, and I want you to reach out if anything goes wrong. We've come a long way in a short time, but the real work continues each day." He met Connor's eyes. "You're official now. Keep that caring spirit and you'll do fine." Lean on Megan, who's shown incredible dedication. Megan smiled, a touch of color rising to her cheeks. Jacob turned to the cooks, dishwashers, and hostesses. "You've all demonstrated that a company is only as strong as the folks on the ground. Thank you for not giving up." People clapped, some patted each other on the back, and a sense of camaraderie filled the room. Megan stepped forward. "Without you stepping in, I don't know what would have happened," she said softly. Connor added, "Yeah, you saved this place." Jacob shook his head. "No, you all saved it by staying and caring. I just shined a light on what needed fixing." In that moment, Jacob felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about boosting profits or expanding market share. It was about maintaining the heart of his diners, places where people could gather for a meal and leave feeling a little better than when they came in. He realized that the chain's true value wasn't just in brand recognition or carefully managed finances, but in the day-to-day kindness that employees and customers shared. He offered everyone a grateful smile, then said, "I'll always be a phone call away. But let me leave you with a thought. You don't need a CEO around to treat each other well. You can do that on your own. In the end, it's really about looking at the person beside you, whether coworker or customer, and saying, 'How can I help?' Keep doing that, and we'll keep growing stronger." They dispersed, turning off the lights and locking the doors. The neon sign out front flickered, casting a soft glow on the sidewalk. Jacob stepped outside, feeling the chilly evening wind on his face. He took one last glance at the sign reading Cresthill Diner, recalling how close the place had come to losing its identity. Now, thanks to the courage of Megan, the steadiness of Connor, and a little intervention, the diner was back on track. Jacob walked to his car, keys in hand, heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Those final weeks ushered in a new era for Cresthill. The diner thrived under a kinder management style, with Megan and Connor guiding the staff through busy shifts, training newcomers and focusing on genuine hospitality. Customers wrote glowing online reviews, praising the renewed sense of warmth. Turnover dropped and employees started recommending their friends to apply. Behind it all, Jacob continued to check in regularly, ensuring that the diner remained aligned with his founding vision. Looking back, he realized a profound lesson. Leadership isn't about barking orders or standing on top of a hierarchy. It's about empathy, accountability, and taking action when you see a wrong. By stepping into his own restaurant in disguise, Jacob learned just how easily good intentions can be overshadowed by complacency and poor oversight. Yet he also discovered how swiftly positive change can take root when one decides to step forward, confront toxicity, and invest in the well-being of others. If you, dear reader, ever find yourself in a position to make a difference, whether in a small office, a busy restaurant, or even your own home, remember Jacob's journey. Sometimes the simplest acts of compassion or the most modest gestures of leadership can mend a broken environment. Maybe you've spotted a coworker who always seems to be on the edge. Maybe a friend is buckling under a demanding situation. Or maybe your own approach to managing others needs reevaluation. The good news is that it's never too late to observe, listen, and step in with empathy. In the end, Jacob proved that by valuing people above all else, a business doesn't just survive, it flourishes. That's the legacy he wanted for Cresthill Diner and every diner in his chain. And it's a legacy you can help create wherever you are by choosing to see, choosing to care, and choosing to act. Because in every crisis, there's an opportunity to rediscover the humanity that binds us all. Final thoughts. Profit and growth do matter, but they can never replace genuine care. A thriving workplace needs respect, fairness, and the willingness to root out harmful practices. Jacob's undercover mission revealed a painful truth, but also illuminated a path to redemption. In your own life, reflect on the silent struggles around you. Is there an overworked colleague, a hurting neighbor, or a neglected friend? Maybe it's time to be the person who notices their tears in the kitchen and does something about it. As Jacob found, a single bold move can restore hope, dignity, and a sense of belonging. If you believe in the power of kindness, share your insights, stand up for someone in need, and never underestimate the ripple effect of compassion. A simple gesture can transform a culture and maybe even save a diner. This story, whether real or fictional, we hope that somewhere out there, people truly encounter narratives like this. Stories spark hope. That's our tagline on this channel because we believe in sharing tales that uplift hearts and awaken possibility. May you take something from this story to use in your own life, perhaps an extra measure of understanding for someone in need, or the courage to stand up for genuine kindness. Thank you for watching.